Okay, so welcome to episode 3 of Stand in Your Truth. I'm joined by Chrissie Chung, and today we're going to be talking about surrendering into presence. So, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are most welcome. Would you like to tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Sure. So, my name is Chrissie. I am a yoga teacher who's been traveling for the last maybe 4 or 5 years, and I've just come back from Bali to resettle in England. And that's really the crux of it at the moment, just sharing something that I'm passionate about and a thing that's given me so much direction in terms of trying to navigate through all of this uncertainty of life.
Yeah. So just to let the viewers know a little bit about how I kind of come to hear about you, I think I've been doing yoga with you for about 3 years now. So I think it was like 2017, something like that, 2018. I went to one of your classes. It was at Hot Pod actually. And I just remember the way that you taught. I've been to quite a few yoga teachers, and the way that you actually teach, for me, it was really about the language of embodiment as well as obviously doing the poses. And for me, it really helped me kind of energetically get into that idea of presence, I guess, what we're going to be speaking about today. And just coming into the present moment, being kind of at peace with yourself and your body. And I just really like the way you teach. So I'd love to share it with the viewers. Can you tell us a little bit about you and your journey and how you kind of came to stand in your truth right now as a yoga teacher traveling all over the world?
Sure. So it can sound a little cliche, but
Mm-hmm.
I finished my degree at uni. It really started off in the very standard way of doing my GCSEs, my A levels, university degree, and it was beautiful and there was merit in it. But I suppose I never really stopped to ask myself what I truly wanted. And even now, it's a really hard question. We never give ourselves that permission, and so often we don't know the answer. And I studied broadcasting and I settled into my first job. And I just remember already in the first 2 days, I was just like, is this it? And I somehow felt cheated that I'd worked so hard and been promised so much, and then thought that this would be what the rest of how the rest of my life would play out. And it's not to say that it won't serve some people, but for me personally, there was something within me that wasn't being met. And I was lucky in that my family and my parents supported me in kind of flitting from thing to thing with, often with it, we carry the sense of failure. And so I was battling that, quitting one thing to do another, rather than seeing it as a courageous act to search for the thing that might bring me more fulfillment in my individual life. It was kind of pushing past that, oh God, is this another failure? I have to do something else. And I shifted. I went from working in TV as a researcher, which was fantastic and wonderful and was a necessary piece to my puzzle. And then I retrained as a chef, and I went from one grueling thing into another. And I love food. So again, it served a purpose for a while, but I couldn't give my entire life to that. And so, as you do, I went through a shift, and it was a big breakup with someone who meant a lot to me, that pushed me towards doing a yoga teacher training that I'd been looking at for years. I think even in that first ever job in the first few days, and I didn't know why. And my mom encouraged me, so I went and I searched for it, and there was something within that just shifted. And so that's the cliche. It's like I went on a training and life changed, but it really did. And I think being in that environment where everyone else was also searching kind of gave me the permission and that sense of support, and we're in this together, to explore it a little more. And it was just that first yes and that first trust fall into something that felt so unfamiliar allowed me to continue saying yes. And so that was it. And I just didn't turn back. There were opportunities and temptations, but I just continued, and life has been richer and fuller for it, for sure.
That's so interesting. I love speaking to people who have these very interesting kind of pivot points in their career, because it seems like you've done a number of really different things. Was there how did you come to that decision point, like in, you know, when you kind of made that transition to go towards that yes?
So when I was working in kitchens, I was working in London, and
Mm.
they were fine dining, intense, beautiful restaurants. And we got tired. My partner at the time was also a chef, and we were just exhausted. And he was exhausted to the point of, depression,
Mm.
for want of a better word. We don't explore kind of mental health. And it's such a taboo topic that even then it was hard to explore. And we were searching for something else. And so we moved back to Nottingham. And I picked up a job in a local cafe where I was supposed to be baking cakes, which I would love, but I ended up running a kitchen. Um, and I didn't love it. And it was to try and make ends meet. And the bigger picture was to save money and go traveling together, because I was in the mindset that I didn't have enough to go, or I couldn't. And that kind of restrictive, limited mentality. Um, and because both of us were going through these, I suppose, parts where we were searching ourselves, it ended up falling apart, and we had to expand separately. And it was in that moment where I was finding myself in certain repeated patterns within the relationship, within my life, that I'd looked at this thing that I'd been looking at before, and I had no rhyme or reason. I didn't really know why. And yeah, it was the support of my mum. She just said, yes, go and do it. There's something in this. And so I did. And it was also the support of Sarah, the owner of Hot Pot in Nottingham, who was just like, you're ready. And so I trusted their words. I wasn't ready. I got there, and on the first day, like, it was an Ashtanga training, my first one, and I was just like, I hadn't a clue what I was doing, but I just kept going. And yeah, it was the support of others, and also the mess. Sometimes we avoid the mess of life and those situations that just feel challenging and uncomfortable, but really they're gifts of opportunity. Which I've come to realize now. It didn't feel like it at the time. It felt scary and unknown. Uh, but I suppose the other people saying yes was enough for me to be like, okay, I'll explore it. And it held me and it embraced me. And so, yeah, that was it. There was no turning back.
How do you feel that you've changed since that big decision point?
I think the biggest thing for me has been learning to trust.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to think and believe certain things, whether we're aware of it or not. It's just the way we grow up, and we can't avoid that. And so we have to unravel it again, and we have to break through those conditions that can sometimes limit us. And in our individuality, we come up through a system that's structured, and the reality is we're all so different, we're all so complex in who we are, that we can't fit into that box. And sometimes it's the trying to fit into the box that makes us feel separate and lost. And this particular path for me, and this practice, which at its heart is all about turning in, not just to get quiet, but to explore yourself, to know yourself more intimately, has allowed me to trust on such a deep level, as you did as a kid. There's those feelings of intuition, and we still have them, those moments where we feel this fire in our belly, where we know something at our deepest core has to be right, and we follow it. It's given me more space to rest in that. And with that comes hope, and the belief in possibility. And so all those anxieties, all those worries that used to just busy my mind, it's not that they're not there, they just don't take up as much space. And instead, that space is taken up by joy, and yeah, potential, and the belief that I can live in a way where I feel like I'm thriving, and I can take in just the full spectrum of life. And it's delicious.
Yeah. That's absolutely beautiful. And I really think the word trust is what it's all about. I mean, that's kind of why I set up this series, actually, is like just developing self-trust and speaking to people that have trusted something, and they had no roadmap, they didn't know where it was going to go. It's kind of going into some unknown land, but just trusting and following that. It's almost like a thread of curiosity, like, something that you feel like, this seems interesting, I'm going to follow it. And then there's something else, and there's something else. And then before you know it, you've walked 10 steps along that path. And like you say, you're, a yoga teacher before you know it. So yeah, really interesting. So you teach presence. Can you tell us a bit more about presence and what that actually means?
So it's such a nuanced thing, and yoga asks this of us constantly.
Mm.
In its simplest form, presence is the capacity to sit with life as it is. It's the ability to rest in the moment, in its raw truth, without placing stories or ideas or labels around it, which when we think about it is it's simple at its core, but it's also very really complex in its ask, because the way the mind works is to place judgment, because it's part of our survival. And so yeah, it's just opening yourself to each moment without needing or wanting it to be anything else. And so with that is this level of acceptance. And the reason for that is a softening, is a not trying so hard, not needing to control, which is really essential in life, because everything is always changing. There is so much uncertainty. With uncertainty is a level of fear. And so this sort of practice of awareness, of presence, is the thing that allows us not to push the fear away, not to push the doubt, the limitation, but to make friends with it, to see it and to hold its hand, and then to walk through life with it. And so it's a really empowering tool. It's not that it's always easy to get there, especially with the lives that we lead. We have to retrain ourselves, but the rewards are great.
Mm. What would that actually look like showing up on the mat? So if you were, present in your yoga practice, what would that look and feel like?
So it really depends on an individual. And so, some days being present is watching your mind be a complete mess.
Mm.
It's fighting yourself. And other days it's not. It's this complete spaciousness. The spaciousness is where we're steering ourselves towards, but that doesn't mean your experience will always be that. And so, some of my best practices where I have been present in the end has
Mm.
been first me fighting myself. I remember arriving to one practice that, as we began it, I knew it because we'd done it before with my teacher, and I was like, yes, I love this one. And that expectation was the trigger for me to learn some lessons. And it was awful. I was fighting myself, I was everywhere. And so there was a lack of presence first, but by the time I got to the end, I could see the mess that I'd played out, and I could laugh at myself.
Mm.
Um, and so it comes in many forms. And that might be where we begin, especially if we haven't asked ourselves to slow down first. But eventually, really, it's about pause, because it's in the pause that you can then steer the mind towards a level of stillness, because it wants to be distracted and it wants to move out, and we're trying to pull it in. And then what that gives you is this feeling of focus, of one pointed concentration. And with that concentration, all of that other external noise, all that periphery just softens and becomes quiet. And despite life continuing to move, you can hear the gentle hum, maybe other people's breath. There's this kind of inherent stillness, and with that, a peace and just a settling. And it's like a sigh of relief, because everything else is so busy and so fast. You just remember that you can actually be still within that. It's like being in the eye of a storm.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, I think so many people need that right now, right? There seems to be so much chaos in our outer world, like it's kind of driving us to focus inwards, right?
Totally. And one of my favorite teachers, he says the only true measure of practice is life. So it's
Mm.
not even about what happens to you on your mat, but it's about what that affords you afterwards. And at the pillar of practice, the foundation is stability. It's stabilizing ourselves within that capacity for peace. And so, the tradition tells us that actually our inherent nature is peaceful, it is soft, it's tranquil and calm. But our tendency to be thrown off that is frequent. And so we train ourselves within practice to hold steady even when it feels uncomfortable. And
Mm.
that's a key piece to be able to approach life then from that steady ground.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it's a bit like a tree, metaphor for a tree, when you're starting off. It's kind of
Yeah,
like, you're blowing in the wind, but then as you kind of become more embodied, it's like the roots, you become more rooted into yourself, right?
100%. And it's
Yeah.
about, with these beginning practices, but particular with the style I'm diving into at the moment, we call, that the first level of training the mind, we call it moon practice. The mind is sort of is the moon, but
Mm.
it's learning about the self and seeing your stuff so that you can plant those firm and deep roots, so
Yes.
that when life rocks you, you're there still. It's not
Mm.
that it won't feel challenging or uncomfortable. It's not that there won't be moments that suck, but you'll just be able to hold yourself within that and move through, rather than trying to hide and avoid it and push it away.
Mm. Yeah, just like you say, embracing that kind of difficulty and discomfort. Um, when you talk about surrendering and surrendering into presence, what do you mean by that?
So surrender can be seen as weakness.
Mm.
We can see it as passivity, but it's especially in yoga, it's sort of as a path in and of itself. And really, it's our ability to let go of that need to control. And
Mm.
it's not easy, because we like control. And as there is in pretty much all of yoga, there's always these contradictions, there's paradox, because it tells us to have firm resolve, to decide where we want to direct our energy towards and to move towards it with full heart. But then also, there's this concept of non-attachment, of letting
Mhm.
go.
Yeah.
And really, it's about resting in this space between the two.
Yeah.
And the surrender is also part of the acceptance. If I can let go of my need to control, I can fully be with this moment as it is. And then from that quiet space, without needing to react to my potential feeling around it, I can just pause.
Mm.
And then I can be skillful in the way that I interact with that and choose how to respond in a way that will really serve me, rather than getting lost up in the thoughts that are the reaction to it first.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes total sense because I think sometimes we don't want to surrender because it feels unsafe, right? Is that why most people would kind of resist, surrendering into the present moment?
Totally. It's
Mm.
scary. You know, One of the things I love is that when we start looking at like neuroscience and studying the brain and understanding about our nervous system, it's kind
Mm.
of telling us everything that yoga tells us too. And unfortunate for us is that even when we have the intention of letting go of these habits that perhaps don't serve, the nervous system will find that scary, because a habit is what makes us feel safe. And
Yeah.
so even if it's a habit that's causing you harm, the letting go of it, whilst it may feel good maybe initially, will then bring up the fear of like, how can I let go of this thing that is me? And so yeah, surrender is hard. And and a lot of people ask me about letting go too, like this part of surrender. And it's not something we can force, but rather we use the vehicle and the tools of our practices to bring ourselves into that space of feeling so safe that it will naturally occur and unfold. And so that there will be moments where you don't want to, and it happens to me all the time. And I've had pretty much a week of that, where I've just been pushing and pushing and pushing against my resistance.
Mm.
And even in my practice, I sat and there was a moment where I was like, I'm not going to do my pranayama meditation today. I just don't feel like it. But then the other part of my mind was like, no, you should do it. Like you'll feel good afterwards. And I battled my way through it.
Mhm.
And it was the process of even battling my way through it that I then got to that space where I felt soft and safe. And all those things that I've been pushing against and making myself contract in,
Mm.
just they disappeared, and I could laugh at myself.
Yeah, yeah. And that's another thing that I really get value out of in your yoga sessions is that feeling of expansion. You talk a lot about surrendering into, kind of the sky and, that feeling. I know that when you're in fear, it is a contraction energy, isn't it? We kind of make ourselves even, when we're in fear, we make ourselves small. But surrendering is about opening in all ways. that right?
Totally. And it can feel counterintuitive, at least for me when I was exploring it. It was just this moment of feeling into my practice where I was like, because this idea of slowing down, of turning in, of getting quiet feels like less and less and less. And on one level it is, but it's the less that allows you to remove all these layers that you're carrying through your day, through the roles that you have to assume to fulfill your day. So that once that is off, there is this expansion. It's so quiet that you feel more open, and that opening is both in terms of being able to receive the light that's trying to move through you, but also in the way that you can offer yourself.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's a getting quiet, but the byproduct of that is an expansion of you, and
Mm.
it's special.
Yeah, I think so many of us in the Western world, we struggle with that. We struggle with that. We keep ourselves busy, we keep ourselves distracted because we just have no idea what it is like to come into that stillness and that surrender and how transformative it can be, I think. Yeah. So in terms of like becoming more present, obviously it's something that I think everybody needs and wants right now, especially with everything that's going on in the world. It can be so easy to kind of get sucked into the media and get sucked into obviously different people's opinions with what's going on. How can we kind of just come back to ourselves and feel more present in the moment?
So the first thing is going to be to pause, which
Mm,
will be difficult. And I think, one of the key pieces or tips from me is that your mind will push back. And
yeah.
if it feels uncomfortable, try to just wait a little longer and know that it's a retraining and a process. And so, you know, when I first started and had to slow down, the feelings that were brought up in me were like frustration and anger. I felt rage, but I promise there's a sweetness waiting for you on the other side. And so the key is to do a little less. It's to give yourself that permission to actually rest and to know that's not failure. It's necessary and it's vital in terms of you functioning in a way that will allow you to thrive. If we don't take that rest, we can't be our fullest selves. Harnessing your breath. The breath is the fastest way to shape the mind. Like, it has this direct impact on the nervous system. Just trying to sit down and get quiet and pull the mind into stillness isn't going to work. The mind, it just likes to move. It's hard to control. But if you even just sit now and take a full breath in and out, you'll feel how your focus goes to the movement and the feeling of your breath. And so naturally it turns it in. And if you keep shaping your breath in that way, it will calm you, especially with very specific breath. If you breathe into the belly, that will target the parasympathetic nervous system, which will gear and steer you towards rest. And if you lengthen your exhales feel like an emptying out. And so that would be that's the key tool. Sit down, breathe deeply into your belly, lengthen your exhales, and that will start to give you a taste of what presence and awareness and just resting with yourself feels like. It will be this really delicious sense of emptying out. With each breath out, even imagine that stress is just like fading from the body. And when you have that tactile and felt experience, it will hopefully infuse you to search and find a little more.
Yeah, thank you for those tips. I certainly think that it's going to help a lot of people. And I think it feels to me, whenever I've done a class with you, is like surrendering is almost like you don't have the thoughts. They're there at first and then they just start to slowly drift away as you kind of move from the head, and in the busy mind, the monkey mind, as they say, into the body. And you start, like, say, start breathing from the belly, and then you just come into the body.
Mhm.
So is that what you would say that surrendering into witness consciousness feels like?
Totally. Again, there'll be different ways for people. But this moving into witness consciousness, again, it is that quietening. So that what you realize is that, the mind will keep moving. That's its process. It does this. But we can slow down how much it does this. And in that slowing down of these ripples of thought, you will start to find a space. It's almost like between and behind the thoughts. between each breath, there's this space. Within that space, you can feel a part of yourself that's just watching it all happen. And that's awareness. And that's presence, being the witness too. And it's a very quiet space where you don't feel like you need to label or judge a thing. You can just sit with it. With that too is this feeling of like, I'm okay. This is okay. I feel pretty whole. And then there's the realization that there was nothing external you needed, nothing you needed to buy, nothing you needed to achieve or do. It's just right here. And so, yeah, I mean, at least for me, that's been the biggest gift of just keep pulling myself back into that space when I'm overwhelmed, when I'm anxious. I'm remembering like, that's fine. That stuff that's happening, they're just thoughts. They can just be the thoughts. I don't need to identify with them. When I come back into this space of wholeness, of witness, when I'm observing, it just all fades.
Yeah. And it feels delicious, like you say, it feels so nice. And the ironic thing is, a lot of us are scared or we're fearful about slowing down and surrendering into that presence. But when we do, we feel so calm and so at peace because, like you say, that sense of peace is always there. It's just that we've been so kind of caught up with what's going on and in the mind that we can't access that deep kind of fountain of peace, I suppose. Yeah.
Totally. And I think, another thing is we're so geared towards sending our attention outwards. And again, it's these roles that we assume. I am this, I am that. I am the yoga teacher, I am the daughter, I'm the mother. And it's not that we shouldn't have those roles, we do, but when we're so attached to them, then the slowing down and the emptying and the separating from that identification will feel scary. And so it's very natural to feel like a sense like we're going to fade completely. Like, who will I be if I'm not these things? But on the other side of that fear and that discomfort, you realize it's actually okay. And it's not to say that you won't resist it. I still resist it on certain days where I feel like things aren't going my way. And actually, just coming into that space would be the best thing for me. And yet, it probably takes me, a while to get there. I'll push back first.
Yeah. I feel like it's some kind of void that you can go into, or some kind of sense of space and presence that you're almost like letting go of your current identity and your current attachments, right? Because for you to move from chef to yoga teacher involved obviously all of that letting go of attachments of who you were at that time, making space for something unknown, that vastness of possibility, and then moving forward towards something that you didn't quite embody it yet, right? Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's a very interesting journey, that's for sure. Do you have any examples or stories about how, when you were standing in your truth and your practice of presence, whether you had any challenges and how you overcame those?
The challenges always pop up. And I think, I think one of the biggest ones I can speak to on a kind of a more open level is this sometimes in order to say yes to yourself, you have to say no to others.
Mhm.
And it's difficult ground to tread. We want to please, we want to hold space for others, and sometimes that can mean self-sacrifice, and it can be difficult, aligning to your own values and your own ethics. And it can mean turning away from certain things that felt like they should be right. And that's hard, removing yourself from the expectations. But these practices are the things that allow you to rest in that. So that rather than catastrophizing or creating stories around it, you can just pause and, in that really positive space, see what the next solution might be, or what is the best outcome of this. Okay, this is not going how I may have expected it, but that doesn't mean it's the end of the world. What's my opportunity for growth here? And then on the other side of that too is, in this saying yes to ourselves and sometimes no to others, it's a focusing on your values. A lot of things that have come up during this specific time where there's a lot of opinion, a lot of noise going on, you know, we can quite easily fall into judgment and into blame and into a sense of self-righteousness. Even when there's moral high ground behind it, it doesn't help, and it closes us off. It's a big one I've been exploring, and one of the beautiful pieces of practice is that it asks you to remove from things like judgment, because those emotions do close you off to the possibility. They stop you from seeing the potential goodness in another, and then we lack compassion. And so, yeah, these practices have allowed me to one, honor myself, but to also open myself to others more fully, to see the best in people, to try and not pick them apart because they're not fulfilling my needs, you
Mm.
know, to see them for where they're at and who they are, and everything they're offering. And when I'm triggered or when something comes up, to take ownership of that and to explore it myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's almost like the more you kind of open to yourself, right? The more you can then be open and hold space for others in that non-judgmental. Is that right? Is that kind of, yeah.
Yeah, totally. I think the real work is always on ourselves.
Yeah.
The most that I can do in terms of giving back to life, to this world, is to work on myself so fully that I show up in my highest and best qualities, so that I'm less reactive. And yes, when we're in that space, when someone else is falling apart or reacting or something's going on, you can still be that pillar of stability and compassion and kindness and tolerance. And you know, if we each took accountability of our stuff and just did all of that work, I'm not saying we'd be perfect. We, of course, you know, everything is continued work. But imagine if everyone did that, how life might look. Um, but it's not easy. And actually doing the work on yourself and seeing your own stuff, that's messy and that's uncomfortable. Like you see the stuff you'd rather avoid, and some of it's not pretty.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, actually, I was introduced to all of my stuff through yoga. Actually, it's just came at a time in my life where I started to slow down, and I really, really resisted against that for a long time, because then you do start to kind of, like you say, it's about turning that attention inwards. And at the moment, especially, like you say, we're so conditioned to look outside of ourselves. But if we just turn that awareness and that attention inwards, and we start thinking, okay, well, how can I work on myself? How can I work on my triggers? How can I become more compassionate, and open, right? Open and more receptive, to life? Then I think that, yeah, the world would be a much better place, I think.
Absolutely.
So you talk about, non-resistance. How can we kind of move forward through life, like taking this principle through yoga and through the mat and through our life? How can we move through life in a non-resistant way?
It comes back to, I mean, it all threads together.
Mm.
When we become quiet and when we steer our mind back towards its inherent quality of tranquility, of calm, of peace, what it allows to rise forth is this capacity for clear seeing. So to see the moment as it is without needing to place a story on it. What rises from that is present moment awareness, to rest in the moment exactly as it is. And this really takes us into these deeper experiences or meditative experiences where we can come to know ourselves more fully. And, you know, all of that, all of that allows for a level of acceptance. It all feeds into the other. And the acceptance is how we live without resistance. It's how we can, and again, it's not to say that you won't feel the feathers ruffled, you won't feel that slight contraction, but it's that ability to pause and instead of reacting immediately, just to allow ourselves to feel the irritation, to feel the anger, to see it, to let that move through you, and to show all of the feelings, joy as much as sorrow, warmth. And then we move through life. And so it's that relearning of again, non-labeling, non-judgment. And it's tough. I'm still doing it myself. Like, you know, more and more I come to realize there's certain emotions that I will just repress and I won't feel. And there's two levels. Maybe we'll feel too much. But it comes down to these perceptions that we've been conditioned to believe. Anger is bad, joy is good. No, they're necessary emotions that need to move through the body. And so all of these practices enable us to carry a level of awareness where we can, again, it's this witness, we
Mm.
can just sit with it and
Mm.
accept it, and then choose to move through in a skillful way that serves us. And that's the key to non-resistance. Just the acceptance to meet each experience, to see it as an opportunity for growth, to know that there's a way through. We don't have to catastrophize. We don't have to get caught in the limitation around it. Just to pause and be with it first, even if it feels uncomfortable. And then you'll be guided. You'll listen to that voice of intuition, and you'll move through in the way that feels accessible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's what noticing our truth is all about, right? It's about just kind of listening to whatever's going on for us right now, whatever that may be, right? Because we're taught that, like exactly what you said, that some emotions are bad, or that we shouldn't feel this shame, or so we push those things away. And I think in terms of that, we can kind of become disconnected from what our actual truth is. So if we stay present, as I understand it, if we stay present, then we can listen more to whatever's going on and then take appropriate steps from there, I guess.
100%, a hundred
Mm.
percent. Like, you have those moments where you just have this flash of insight or this gut feeling, and you're just like, this is it. And then 2 seconds later, you've got the mind being like, but maybe not because of this, and da 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 da. And we're just, we're so used to rationalizing. This
Mm.
isn't logical. And so we've cut ourselves off from that feeling of intuition, which is really our greatest teacher. It's also our greatest healer. It tells us what we need. And the body's a massive part of that. Those sensations, those ripples of emotion, they're feedback, and the necessary feedback that will steer us back on track if we've come off track, um, and towards a fuller life. And so it's such a key piece. And when we get quiet, we hear those gentle whispers. Unfortunately, intuition isn't the loudest thing. It's not high volume. It's soft nudges first, until eventually, if you don't listen enough, then it might be like a smack in the face. um, but gentle nudges first that we feel. And there's probably been moments, I have them, I still have them, where I'm just like, I've had that feeling and then I ignore it, and then it comes back to bite me, and I'm like, God, I knew it was there, and like, I just should have gone with that first initial feeling. And
Mm.
so these practices to get us quiet, to drop into awareness, and it's not just awareness of mind, it is awareness of body too, and sense organs, and it's the full spectrum of our experience, so that we can live with greater awareness in our lives, and so that we can hear that, gentle whisper, and follow it. And from that is more joy. When we listen to those things that feel right for us, that really speak to our unique desires, and the desires that drive us, that keep coming back, that is the key of just, it's just joy for joy's sake. You don't know why, but you feel whole, and it's enough. And all those fears, all those other worries, they do start to settle. They pop up every now and again, but they just don't control your life in the same way, because again, this deep trust comes from it. It's such a beautiful gift.
Yeah. So would you say that you use your body as almost like a guidance system rather than the rational mind? How would you go about that? Yeah.
Totally,
Mm.
totally.
Mm.
Yeah, and I mean, I feel like the body is such a, again, it's such a tangible thing, like the breath is. It's such a tangible thing to first find intuitive feeling. And like, actually, it was a thing that really spurred me forward in practice, because yoga can speak to these big and lofty ideas, which are really hard to reach. But your practice is the thing that will take you there via your body. When you give that room to pause and feel what the body's feeling, to feel the sensations, they call it interoception. It's the body's language and feedback, and that sensation and emotion. It's not words, it's not rational thought. but it's such a key piece, and it allows us again to connect back into feeling, and to listening, and to being guided from that space. But it again, it's a relearning because we've cut ourselves off from that source so often. It's taken me a long time, but it's definitely a key tool, and such a fundamental one to begin with before things get more subtle, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. And like you say, everybody's kind of truth is different, right? So it's all about what feels right for us and what feels good for us. And you know, that might be completely outside the realms of mainstream society or what other people kind of agree on as, you know, the right thing to do or yeah. So yeah, it's really fascinating.
100%. And I think, you know, a lot of spiritual practice and yoga is rooted in something called Sankhya philosophy, and they have something within that called the Mahad, and it means like the noble idea of you. And in a nutshell, what it speaks to is this: your soul had this fantastic idea that it had to live out an experience in a physical body, and that's your reason for coming here and being born. And you can look at kids, and they have, you know, they have the similarities to their parents, but there's also this innate personality, and you have no idea where it comes from. And it's so perfectly calibrated to living out what it wants to live, but life and experiences condition in a way that we forget that. And so we stop listening to that unique calling. And all of practice is really this move towards back to that remembering. And at least for me, I found it so reassuring that we all have our own individual wish to experience in this life, and it's a wish and an experience that will give back in a way that also uplifts others. But when we find that unique spark, we will be so light that it will encourage others to find their own too. And it's not about being the same, and it's not about comparing. It's about feeling into yourself and trusting, even if that thing is, you know, you don't have to be Einstein, you don't have to be a Wimbledon tennis player. It can be like, I feel like I'm supposed to be a mother, and I'm going to be the best mother there is. And that's enough. And so when you find that thing, listen to it, explore it, and it won't guide you wrong.
Mm. Have you ever had any challenges when kind of standing in your own truth and being the authentic you that you are today?
Totally. I still do. And you know what? The biggest challenge isn't the world around me, it's myself.
Mm,
And it's my doubt, and it's my questioning, and yeah, and over rationalizing, and limitation, and like, you know, who am I to do this, who am I to share something? And I'll go through these moments of just expansion and trust, and like, yes, and it feels great, and other moments where I just feel like I have to hide. And so I think the biggest battle is always going to be with myself and my own sense of self-worth, and part of that is the conditioning. Like, I'm not ticking the boxes that are supposed to be ticked in order to achieve this idea of success that we've been brought up to believe. And you know, if someone else shows a sign of fear around what I'm doing, then it will spark the fears within myself.
mm,
And I think that will be the biggest battle always. And then yeah, there will be people that you meet that will there will be some contrast and uncomfortable moments. But again, you know, I've had some recently, you know, expectations not met, disappointments, and none of them were about the other person. It was really an opportunity for that experience to mirror to me
mm,
what was not being met for me, and what would I do in order for, you know, my values, my integrity to be held. And if that meant letting go of something that I felt should have been a certain way, that's okay. It's just steering me to the next thing. And I think the more we can let go of this idea of, you know, things not working out the way we planned being a failure,
yeah.
and instead seeing that as opportunity, and having the courage to be like, okay, that's told me not that, but maybe this. It's,
Yeah.
you know, all of it is just clear guidance to the next thing.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a non-resistant path as well, right? I've had the same experience of being so attached to the way things should be that when they haven't turned out like that, kind of huge amount of discomfort. But when you can kind of just let go with that and just kind of just follow your authenticity, basically, isn't it? You can let go of those things a bit easier, I think.
Totally. And my one of my teachers who I love dearly did this lovely post. And again, it was about the paradox of yoga. And so there's something called
Mm.
sankalpa, which is this resolve born of the heart. And so that's the thing that you move forwards to with, just full belief that it's going to happen. And so that's the direction. And then there's the aparigraha, which is the non-attachment. And it's basically what you speak to. It's like having these ideas and having the intention of moving towards it, and that means making plans sometimes, but holding that plan loosely so that you allow room for life to happen. Because if we're too attached to it being a certain way, these beautiful gifts that life is sometimes offering will have the blinkers on so tight that we won't see them, and opportunities will fall by the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's again going back to that tree metaphor, like trees don't cling on, to their leaves. They kind of just gracefully let go when it's time, right?
Totally.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel like our inner truth changes and how can we listen more, like for people that might be struggling with that?
This is such a tough one. So when I think to it, I sense that the deepest core truth of who you are is something that stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
But our perception of it and our living of it is the thing that perhaps changes. And it comes back to the conditioning again. If there are these layers that cover the truth of who we are, then our experience of it will be different. And perhaps it's in that peeling back of the layers that feels like it changes, but actually the crux of it is always the same. It's you may feel it as you go through changes in life, and especially with spiritual practice and these subtle transformations, you come out the other side and you're like, I am entirely different, but I'm also exactly the same.
Yeah, yeah.
And I sense it's that. And so there is an essence within you, and yoga might call it your divine spark, your light, and that will never change. And it never even dims, but it gets covered by the dust. And so I suspect, at least in my understanding of it and my feeling of it, is that the truth is always there. It's just how we remember it and how we're seeing it, and through which lens we're seeing, that
Mm.
will perhaps make it feel different.
Yeah, and so yoga can help us remove that dust, would you say?
100%. It's
Yeah.
all about removing the dust.
Mhm.
It's settling the mind. There are these different layers of practice. It's settling the mind. You might have practices where you're in long holds. It
Mm.
generates something called tapas, and it's the resilience to rest in that discomfort. On the other side of tapas, when we stay in that fire, is something called tejas. And tejas speaks to this luminosity, the light of your personality, and it shines out the eyes. And so all of it is about stripping back those layers of meeting the triggers, of seeing what the thought patterns are that hold us back, and rewiring them to be the best parts of yourself, and to directing your energy into those beliefs of the self, the willpower, the courage, the trust.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much, Chrissy. I'd like
Pleasure.
to thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. And where can people find you online?
So I have a website, chrissiechungyoga.com. I have all the information about my journey, about the specific lineage of practice that I'm teaching. There's online courses. There's one specifically about presence. I also have Instagram, which is at chrissy.chung. Yeah, and those are my two main channels. There's a Facebook page too, and you can just reach me on any and all of them.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Chrissy. Thank you.